Okay, so it's episode 12, and I'm super excited. My goal, I don't know if I told you this, my goal was to have at least 12 episodes, and I am going to continue, but I'm thrilled to have as my 12th guest Laura Cathcart Robbins, who is the author of acclaimed addiction memoir Stash, a fantastic read, and also co-host of one of my favorite podcasts, The Only One in the Room, which I was lucky enough to be a guest on some years back. So thank you for that. And it's, if you don't know, it's based on an article she wrote after an experience she had being the only one in the room, meaning in a unique position as the only Black woman in a room full of 600 other writers at a very big conference. And her experiences there, which really struck a chord and eventually led to this podcast, which I love so much. So welcome, Laura. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kristin. Thank you for having me.
So I'm sure you know that the gist of the next hour is basically going to be very similar to, as anyone in 12-step meetings knows, when you give a speaker meeting, the arc of your story should basically be what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And that's, of course, in regard to just your dysfunctional life in general, when you were drinking, how you got sober, and how it got better. Our scope is going to be a little bit smaller. It's going to be about sex, dating, and intimacy, because that's one of the aspects of our dysfunctional life that I don't know about you, but I certainly wanted to fix the most and probably needed the most time and help with. Yeah, so why don't we start just by you telling us how old you were when you got clean and sober?
I was 43, about to turn 44.
Okay. And so how long ago was that? How long do you have
It'll
recovered?
be 18 years this summer.
Okay, so long-term
Yeah.
recovery coming up on 20 years, a very big milestone. All right, so why don't you tell us a little bit about what it was like, and go ahead and give us maybe an overview of sort of your drug of choice and when it started, and if you want to even go back a little bit into maybe childhood, because for a lot of us, that's where those triggers and traumas were that sort of propelled us down that path, in as much detail as you like. And then give us an idea of kind of where you were at when you first, as far as your drinking and using, when you first started interacting in romantic and sexual ways. Now, for some people, they didn't start drinking till later, or drinking and using, because I know you were using as well. But then for some of us, we started in high school. So go ahead and tell us your story, kind of how that started for you.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, I was I was 5 years old when this I had a stepfather was introduced to my life, and he was somebody that was my nemesis growing up. Everything I did just seemed to rub him the wrong way. And so there was never any physical abuse, but he was very emotionally abusive toward me, which I didn't have the language for then. So I just tried to do things that either took the spotlight off of me or make him like me, one of those two things. And the making him like me wasn't working, so I ended up doing everything I could to basically hide, which is the subtitle of my book, Stash, My Life in Hiding.
Right.
And that set me up to be able to do that in different circumstances at school, where I was also the only Black one, at one point in my whole school, but always in my class. And so I would hide the things that made me different. Obviously I couldn't hide my physical appearance, but I could hide, talking about portions of my life that were specific to the Black community, and just kind of try to blend in with my white peers. And that continued definitely into my adult life. I didn't start drinking. And first of all, I did not like drinking when I started. Um, it was introduced to me when I was about 16. We would go up to this, I was in Berkeley then, and we would go up to this lookout point, and people would bring cases or 6 packs of Heineken, maybe cases. And there were a bunch of us, and these beers would be passed around, and I would always dump mine and pretend like I was drinking it. I did not like the way it smelled, like skunk to me. I love sweets, like I love chocolate. Like I would have much rather had a chocolate milkshake than that beer.
To be fair,
Um,
Heineken does suck. Can I just say that?
yeah.
And I love beer. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
But whatever I tried, I just turned up my nose at it. Nothing tasted good to me. I didn't like it. That was the primary factor for me, was the taste. because I also didn't like the way it made me feel.
Interesting.
Um, and then I lost lost my virginity. That's a weird thing to say, isn't it? The first time I had sex, I was about to turn 18 2 days later. And it was with this guy that I had been crushing on since like ninth grade, um, who had a girlfriend. He had a girlfriend the first time we had sex too. And it was like one of those typical experiences. It was at a party. He had found a room. I kind of dissociated through the whole thing. I was also just like, oh my God, it's him. Like I couldn't believe that I was finally like getting him the way that I wanted him, but the whole act was weird. He narrated for me. He knew it was my first time. He told me what I was going to feel and how certain things might feel
In a nice way, in a sweet
in a
way.
very nice way. Yeah, really nice guy.
Yeah.
Really nice guy. And it was over pretty quickly. Um So I don't, that's kind of all I remember about that was I remember like the walls in the room
Yeah.
and the coverlet of the bed that we were on.
My first question, first of all, I have to say it's interesting. We have so much in common, except I definitely liked the way alcohol made me feel from the first
Hmm.
drop. That's the biggest difference. But my first time was in high school. It was after a party, or we left the party. He narrated, he told me how it was going to feel. He was very sweet about it. It's going to hurt, but it's okay, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But my first question is, these patterns that we develop, because I had a very hypercritical mother. She was overwhelmed, overworked. She had a lot of kids. She didn't feel like she could ask for help, all those things, right? So I always like to say my mother is an amazing woman and we have a great relationship now, but we really butted heads when I was younger. And I at first tried to just be what she wanted me to be. I spent the first 10 or 12 years of my life desperately trying to just be the little girl she wanted. And when that didn't work, then I just went dark and I got rebellious and angry. But it was, I don't, I probably did try to hide because I used to be like really silly, and whenever I was silly, she would shame me for it, just like grow up, stop acting like a child, whatever, even though I was a child. So those patterns would reappear later in my dating life, right? Like I wouldn't be myself. I would tone it down. I would try to people please, and if I didn't, then I would rebel and try to get you with my edginess. Did you find yourself repeating the patterns, especially because for you it was with your father? And so our fathers are our first role models of who men are,
Well, it
how they're
was
going
my,
to treat us.
yeah, I just want to preface that by saying I had a dad and have a
Oh,
dad
great. Okay.
who was very involved in my life. This was my mother's husband who
Right.
was in the
Sorry.
house. So
Yeah.
it was a big difference for me
Mhm.
because I didn't see him as a dad. I
Right.
saw him as my
You had a more
mother's.
positive relationship with
Yes,
your
yes.
father, but
My
you
my
did.
dad and I, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm wondering if the relationship with your stepdad, or just that presence, that experience of living with someone, or your mother's husband, however you
Mhm,
called him,
mhm.
did did any patterns emerge there that affected how you interacted with men later on?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, because I was so conditioned to edit myself or to, I left a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor depending on who I was with.
Right.
So I absolutely did that in my relationships. And he was my first relationship. I didn't have a boyfriend before him. And I didn't really have him because he had a girlfriend. But
Right.
eventually they broke up and then I had him for a little while. But yeah, I don't even think I thought about it. I think that I just went in knowing you can show him X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
This is what he can know. And would do that kind of innately without really a thought process.
Hmm. And even though we don't really know we're doing that, I think that we do at the time feel a certain dissatisfaction, like a longing maybe to be seen in a way that we're not allowing him to see us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that existed on a subconscious level,
Yeah.
but consciously I was terrified
Yeah.
of,
Oh, sure.
anybody seeing who I really was. And at that point, I had gone through ninth grade of high school, but that was it. I didn't go to, and I don't have a formal education past ninth grade. I had started 10th grade, but I wasn't going to classes. I was just going to the campus. And so that was one of the things I hid. I mean, this guy knew about that because he knew me from high school. He knew I dropped out, but there were all these things that were accumulating. I didn't talk about my mother and stepfather's relationship. I didn't talk about how abusive he was to me. I didn't talk about kind of the loneliness of being the only one in the room through school and like what that felt like. I didn't talk about any of that. All that stuff was compartmentalized.
And do you feel like he tried to get to know you, or if he just seemed like everything was probably fine?
Yeah, I think here's the deal. I present really well.
Yeah.
Like I present as authentic.
Uh-huh.
I present as warm and caring.
Mhm.
The reason I was able to get through a year and change of high school without anybody noticing that something was wrong is because of the way that I present. So
Mhm.
I'm sure him and the boyfriends that followed with the presentation they were receiving didn't have any reason to suspect that anything might be amiss.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's quite a skill that you developed, which probably served you in some ways. And then at some point, it had to become a detriment. It had to work against you, right? Tell us
Yeah.
about, keep going on with sort of how your romantic life developed or your dating life into, and where it intersected with your using. At what age did you start using?
It was right after my second son was born. Um, and so I was in my 30s.
So you got a late start, a
I
little
did.
bit relative.
I did. Yeah. Yeah. But I made up for it.
Yeah.
I definitely made up for it. I did drink in my 20s, even though I didn't like the way alcohol tasted. I ended up liking the way that it made me feel. But I had also started a business then. I started a PR company. I'm on the West Coast. It required me to be up super early for East Coast clients. And anything that was like smack to partying got in the way of that. So I did drink socially on the weekends, but I wasn't, and I still didn't like the way it tasted, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed a glass of wine or, more. I enjoyed getting drunk, with people, but it didn't continue on and
Mhm.
get in the way of my life.
Mhm.
Until I was in my early 30s and I'd had my second son and I couldn't sleep. I was married at that point. And he was someone, his work would take him away for stretches of time. So I was by myself with our two children, our two sons, for stretches of time, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes days. It just depended on what the work was. And so I was kind of drowning, not kind of, I was drowning. I didn't really know anything about kids, and I was not like the babysitter girl. I didn't really want children. I didn't really like children. I still don't really like children,
Yeah.
honestly. As a rule,
Right.
there are children that I really love,
Sure.
but I'm not like a kid person.
Yeah. Some
And
of us are.
so then I had these two babies who I was desperately in love with. Like, so that part clicked in, which I'm really grateful for because I know that that's not always the case.
Mhm.
But they were keeping me up all night. I had this really big life on the outside that I thought I was expected to show up for, even though that was self-imposed. So I was prescribed Ambien to sleep because I wasn't sleeping to reset my system, and then we could really see what was going on. I realized, or I think I realize now that I had undiagnosed postpartum anxiety,
Mhm.
which was different than postpartum depression, which is different than postpartum depression. It has different symptoms. I was tested for postpartum depression and I didn't have that. So it was thought that I was fine.
So this is the first time hearing of postpartum anxiety. Did they not know about it then? So they
Didn't know
didn't
about
test you
it.
for it. And
Yeah.
so they told you you
Yeah.
were fine, which is one of the worst things you can do when somebody is hurting.
Yes. Yes. But it was what they knew at the
Sure.
time. No one had this language. I'd never heard of anybody say it at that time. And all my friends were great. We all got married at the same time. We all had babies at the same time, and they were all doing great. So I was just trying to catch up.
Right.
And so Ambien really helped. It helped a lot. I got a good night's sleep. I felt like I was like ready to just love on my kids and take care of them the way that I wanted to. I was at the end of before I got sober, I was the Parent Association president. But even prior to that, I was always a room mom. I volunteered at the school. I was the fair chair. I was the gala chair, like many years in a row. Like I stayed busy, involved with my kids. They were my life then. I shuttered my PR company. I was all in for my kids and by choice. And so the Ambien really helped me fulfill this ideal that I had of what kind of mom I wanted to be.
Mhm.
And then, the second year, the first year, I think I only took 30 tablets the whole year.
Mhm.
And I used them the way that it was prescribed.
Mhm.
If I needed a reset, I would take it, get a good night's sleep, and then be good for a while. But the second year, I started taking one every night.
Mhm.
And then the third year, I would need one and a half to go to sleep. And then probably by somewhere in that third year, I was waking up in the middle of the night, so I would need more. And by the time I got sober, when I could, which wasn't very often, I would take up to 10 Ambien a day,
Wow.
which is a lethal dosage of Ambien.
Wow.
But like I said, people are always like, you were taking 10 Ambien a day, which I would if I could, but I didn't have that very often. I didn't have that much of it.
Mhm.
If I had, I would have been dead, honestly. I don't know why I laughed at that. That's not funny. I would have been dead if I had had access to what I wanted.
Yeah.
But I had to ration it out because I wasn't getting it from a dealer. I was getting them from doctors and pharmacists, and there are restrictions around how much you can get. So,
Thank God, but I can't imagine the amount that you were taking had to have some kind of effect on just your many aspects of your life, I would imagine. How were things at this time? So you were married with a husband who frequently traveled, sometimes for long periods. How would you sort of categorize your relationship? Do you feel like you had was it a healthy relationship? Had you developed healthy patterns by then? Because like for someone who didn't start using at a really young age, or at least not an addictive pattern, perhaps you, like we're all supposed to, developed healthier patterns and the ability to be vulnerable and open, and to set healthy boundaries, as we fumble through it in high school and usually college. Most of us who aren't addicts are learning how to be a good partner and how to have a healthy relationship through our 20s. And since your patterns, your addiction started in your 30s, do you feel like you and your husband had a healthy relationship, or were you still uh, exhibiting patterns like from back in high school of not showing your true self?
I did not show my true self in my marriage. The thing was, we were in love, like legitimately in love, and it was very romantic and sexy and wonderful, and it was the dream of all my friends. Like we were hashtag relationship goals. However, I had, when I started dating at 18, all I had to hide was that I hadn't graduated from, or that I hadn't finished high school and I had this abusive stepfather, pretty much. By the time I was in my 30s, I had a lot more to conceal.
Yeah.
And I mean, not huge major things. Like I hadn't nothing legal or anything like that, but there were just, jobs that I maybe got let go from because I didn't get, rather. I don't think I ever got let go from, but jobs I didn't get because of my lack of education that I would say either I didn't want, or, I had chosen something else, but I would lie about these things as they came up to to keep my front, to keep the facade that I had built.
Mhm.
And so there were just a lot of things kind of poking through by the time I got married. And in my mind, the marriage was the fix for all of it because all that stuff wouldn't matter now. I was married in a healthy, stable relationship with two kids and two cars and, like, a very enviable lifestyle. So why would it matter that I didn't graduate from high school? I just decided to put all that part of myself away and lock it away forever. I wasn't ever going to tell anybody about it, which I understand now prevented me from having true intimacy.
Mhm.
I didn't understand that then. It just seemed like the logical thing to do. To raise issues that might jeopardize the relationship
Yeah.
I was in didn't seem smart.
Yeah. Well, it's funny
Yeah.
because these days, the younger generations, they, I think they've become aware that that social media and having putting a persona out there ultimately is probably not really good for them. But we did it in our own way too, didn't we? We didn't have, I didn't grow up with social media. Obviously, I'm Generation X. I think you're probably really, you are as well. We're close in age, but we certainly did. You can put a persona out there whether or not the internet exists, right? You can
Yeah.
decide who you want people to see and create that person and project that person. And it's absolutely going to, because intimacy requires the authenticity and then the vulnerability to move forward, knowing that people might get to know you and decide they don't like you and reject you, and be able to move forward anyway to try to make friends. We're talking, platonic intimacy, romantic intimacy, sexual intimacy, it so what did end up happening with your marriage? And you don't obviously have to say much more than, you don't have to say much about how it ended if you don't want to, but were these patterns of yours part of it, part of what ended the marriage?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that what I tried to hold on to was just really unsustainable. And then you put an addiction, a very active, progressed addiction on top of that. Um, so yeah, we got divorced the year that my using kicked up, which was 2008. Um, in December of 2007, I was taking a lot of Ambien, but I only took it at night, and I was still the one who got my kids ready for school and drove them to school and blah blah blah. And by February of 2008, I was taking them during the day as well. Not entire tablets, but just pieces of them so that I wouldn't go into withdrawal. So it had progressed that much in like 3 or 4 months. And so yeah, we got divorced that year. It was a long, um, like we still loved each other, so it was hard, but it wasn't tenable anymore. So we didn't like go into court right away. We never went to court, but we even after we filed, we still tried to figure out if it could work like a few times, but my addiction progressed so quickly, and it was so detrimental by the time I went to treatment in July. So from February to July, it was like I just hit the accelerator on my addiction. And that was the only thing that mattered, was dealing with that. Like I
Did,
figured my marriage was over, but I needed to go deal with this addiction.
yeah. Did he have any idea, or did your kids have any idea what, while you were active in your addiction, did anybody know?
My kids didn't know. No, they weren't aware of me ever being impaired.
Mm,
He absolutely knew something was wrong, but he had no idea what it was. He
mm,
just didn't know. Like he started like looking for stuff to figure it out, but he didn't know what was going on.
mhm.
Yeah.
And so how long have you been divorced now?
The same amount of time, going on 18 years.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would make sense. And so, and I know that you have a partner now. I don't know if you're officially married or not, but
But
you've been in a
yeah.
long-term relationship, a committed relationship for a while.
Yes.
In between those two relationships, how much dating did you do?
So I checked into treatment on July 14th, 2008 at 3 o'clock, and Scott checked in to the same treatment center on July 14th, 2008 at
Right.
5 o'clock. And so we met there, and we are not married, but we have been in each other's lives ever since. We did date each other for 6 years after treatment. We didn't like move in together. We also weren't like a rehab hookup. We didn't have sex in rehab like a lot of patients did,
Yeah.
but we were very, very connected there.
Yeah, I don't know why I completely forgot that story, but I remember hearing the story on your podcast. Actually, you guys were
Yeah.
talking, and I thought it was so sweet. And it's one of the few times I've heard about somebody who got sober and met their future long-term partner either in rehab or directly after. And it's shocking to me because it took me 10 years to even have a somewhat healthy relationship. I was 10 years sober, and that relationship was, you could barely call it healthy. It was as dysfunctional, or certainly became as dysfunctional as it was healthy. So here you have two people who are in rehab. My assumption would be that there's no way you could have a healthy connection.
Exactly.
Did it take time did you have, fumble through some dysfunction, or did you just sort of um come together and click so well that you started proceeding forward in a healthy way? How did that work out?
So when Scotty and I met, obviously I was at my lowest. I was in a treatment center away from my children for the first time. I was devastated, devastated, and I was not interested in him at all. I was only interested in staying in my children's lives. That was it. And if getting sober was the thing I had to do that, then I was willing to do that, but I didn't want to get sober.
Mm.
I didn't want to not be able to sleep anymore, which is what I thought was going to happen. I didn't want to not be able to have a drink anymore if I wanted to. So I didn't want sobriety, but I wanted my kids bad enough to acquiesce to sobriety.
Right.
And he made me laugh in there. He made it bearable in there. He would imitate like the techs. The techs are the people that take care of you in treatment, and he would imitate them like really good imitations. So he was like mimicking people, and I would just laugh and laugh. He smuggled candy in for me because they didn't allow us sugar, and
Right.
I was going through sugar withdrawal as well, or caffeine. But I'm not a big caffeine person, but I really needed sugar, and he found a way to smuggle some in for me. And we would sit and talk. Like it was just such a balm for what I was going through. I honestly think I would have left if he hadn't been there. I don't think I could have managed
Mm.
to, if I didn't have a substitute for my kids,
Mhm.
I couldn't have stayed. I would have just bailed out early. And I'm so grateful that I didn't. When I came back to LA, he went back to Utah, and we stayed in touch on the phone. But as much as attracted as I was to him and as connected as we were, my priorities hadn't shifted. My kids were still my priority. And so to answer your question, I think that's what kept it healthy, even though we grew into that healthy.
Mhm.
Like we weren't healthy at all, either of us. He has two daughters as well, and a divorce. He was divorced a year before me. Um, and I felt like we were kids, like we were in our 40s, but we were kids. Like we had never done a relationship sober. We had never done a relationship. Um, Honestly, we had never been vulnerable in a relationship, either of us. And so we had this batting order that we set out from the very start. It's like because he moved to LA to join us a sober living, and he lived there for a while, for a couple years, 4 years
Oh,
actually.
wow.
Not in that same place, but he lived in sober situations for about 4 years. Um and so we're like, if we're going to be in the same city, we have to have a batting order. Our recovery has to come first, because if I don't keep my recovery, I don't get my kids.
Sure.
And then our respective families come second, my kids, my parents, his parents, and everything else, including each other, comes third.
Mhm.
And so, that meant if I was supposed to go to a 12-step meeting and my kids wanted me to stay and watch SpongeBob with them, I had to go to the meeting
Mhm.
because my recovery had to come first.
Mhm.
And if my kids wanted me to watch SpongeBob with them and Scott wanted to see me, I had to stay with my kids
Mhm.
because my kids have to come before him. And so we kept that batting order, with very strong boundaries
Mhm.
through that first year, through that second year, through that third year, through that fourth year. And the fifth year, is when I started kind of integrating him into my kids' lives
Mhm.
lightly.
Mhm.
And then the sixth year, when they were entering high school, is when or one of them was entering high school, is when I said, how would you feel about him living here with us?
Mhm.
And we had that discussion and they were okay with it. So
Mhm.
then he moved in.
Well, it's amazing. It definitely sounds like having, I mean, for me, the gifts of my program, the 12 steps and the coping skills and the principles that they represent certainly gave me a structure in my life that enabled me to move forward really and use them as the framework for sort of every aspect of my life. But I didn't have kids. And I did have, a job that took about 80 hours a week, and that helps provide some structure. But I would imagine that between having both of you having kids and lives and then having the gifts of the program, the tools of the program, that seemed to
Mhm.
give you a lot of structure that helped you keep on that healthy
Yeah.
path as far as the relationship went.
Yeah. And, without the addiction in my life,
Mhm.
I'm a very disciplined person.
Mhm.
Like I get up at the same time every day. I drink a liter of water. I work out. I meditate. Like I do those things before I sit down at my desk and do all my admin work before I get into writing, which is what I do for a living now. And I love it. I love the structure. I don't need an accountability person. I don't need that because I'm very disciplined on my own.
Yeah.
But like I said, without the addiction, everything goes out the window and I'm hyper focused on one thing.
Yeah.
It's getting
Yeah,
loaded.
it's interesting. I'm the same way. In fact, I was like that in high school. Like you give me a research paper assignment, I'm going to go home that night. I'm going to start it. Like I was always very regimented. And I think that even in my using, and I used for 15 years and my life was absolute chaos. And I see some people who are out there and they sort of thrive on that chaos and they enjoy that chaos. Even when I was using and using every day and 24 hours a day and sleeping 5 nights a week or whatever, it's still I missed routine. I love routine. I crave routine. I
Oh, I
like,
love
and
routine.
and being
Yeah.
a self-employed person all my life, if you're not disciplined and in that way that you're describing, and it
Mhm.
really is beneficial too when you apply that discipline to relationships and how you're going to move forward.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it's a fascinating story. I so appreciate you sharing it with us. Are you working on another book by any chance? You say you're writing now.
Yeah, so I sold a novel, which is it's autofiction. It's autobiographical fiction. It's actually based on the period of my life that I kind of skipped over when I was in my 20s and owned that PR agency. I was a music and film PR, public relations publicist.
Hmm.
Public relations publicist. I
Yeah.
was a music and film publicist, and I was on retainer with like every studio and every label, but only for their black artists. So they gave
Nice.
me their black artists, and I would do, but I was every month they all paid me to. So I had this really kind of rich, crazy 5 years where I was, with Biggie Smalls the first time he went on stage, and like, Tupac and Diddy and like all of these people. So I fictionalized the story and wrote about that. It's called I Want Your Life. And that comes out. It's going to be an Audible original next year. And then I have another novel that I wrote that's also based in my life. It's actually based on an affair that two people have in Al-Anon, which is, if you don't know, it's the sister program to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's where people, in Alcoholics Anonymous, you're powerless over alcohol, and Al-Anon, you're powerless over the alcoholic.
Right.
So these are for the loved ones. And
Right.
so
I
anyway, yeah,
I have to say, first of all, I can't wait to read that book. Because the peek behind I wrote my first book, Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh, is a peek behind the curtain of the rock and
right.
roll life in the 90s.
Yes.
I loved all my life since I was a kid. I always wanted to peek behind the curtain, kind of almost anything, but especially the entertainment industry. So that should be fascinating. And what's really interesting to me is that you didn't finish high school. You're a very disciplined person, clearly a highly intelligent person, obviously a sort of a self-starter. You had your own PR company, I think, or I mean, you were very successful in your 20s in a what I imagine is probably maybe a even cutthroat business. And yet, so high school just wasn't working for you in some ways, but that doesn't seem to have had anything to do with your intelligence or your abilities.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with my intelligence. When the school I went to in Cambridge, where I grew up until I was high school age, was a Montessori school where they didn't give grades. And if you presented well, like you knew the
Mhm.
stuff,
Right.
then you could just move forward. And
Oh,
so I
wow.
didn't
Okay.
really learn anything. I figured stuff out,
Uh-huh.
but I didn't learn it the way my peers did. So by the time I got to my first public high school, that was Berkeley High, it was 3,000 people. I was totally overwhelmed. I was lost. And I just couldn't make it. I couldn't even find the classes.
Mhm. That's
And
we have so
yeah,
much in common. When I went to UT, I mean, that was college, and there's like 40, 50,000 students there.
yeah,
And I was a straight A student, graduated high school actually a little bit early, didn't really try that hard. It got my SAT scores kind of put me into Mensa just automatically. But
wow.
I was so overwhelmed and terrified and insecure that I got nothing but C's and D's and incompletes and F's, I think, my first semester of college because I was terrified and overwhelmed. And that's when I started drinking and using that as my
Oh, smart.
coping
Yeah.
skill. But I also want to thank you for bringing up Al-Anon because for me, my first a few Al-Anon meetings, I probably went to, I don't know, 3 years sober, something like that. And I remember finding everybody in there annoying, which says, I'm sure, a lot more about me than them. But I quit going and I went back and I realized this is a lot about boundary settings, which I think might be like the coping skills I learned in my AA and NA and OA, my original 12-step meetings. It's kind of like getting your high school diploma or maybe your bachelor's at life, right? And I always considered Al-Anon and all of that sort of work on codependency and boundary setting to be like the PhD of life skills, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
I agree. I agree. And even in the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous, there are some meetings that are just for newcomers that are like kindergarten
yeah,
almost. And then there are like studies of traditions and steps that are like more kind of high
yeah,
school level. It's really interesting. But you talked, you said it a couple times about the tools for living and it's the tools. I had a lot of tools for living before I got sober, but the tools weren't sharpened and they were very few.
yeah,
I had tools, but they really could have used some attention and I was using a hammer where I needed a
yeah.
wrench, right? So I have the expansion of how I can face challenges now
Mhm.
um is to me it's amazing
Yeah.
of how I can align myself with what is instead of resisting it or fighting against it.
Mhm.
And not as a way of just surrendering to everything, but really to just not have to fight everything and not have to try to fix everything
Yeah.
because I am a fixer.
Yeah.
I
And
want to
that's
get
what
over
will
that.
drive me to drinking because it's exhausting to go through
Yeah.
life every day trying to figure out how to uh, plow through or hammer through everything when in fact you aligning yourself. I love that. I love that term. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for that. I so appreciate this. Thank you so much.
You're so
This has been a
welcome.
fantastic interview. Oh, and so your uh, the book that's coming out, the Audible book, it's called I Want Your Life, I think, and
That's
that's
right.
the
Yeah.
okay. And then you mentioned one about an affair between a
Right.
couple
The
of Al-Anons.
something
What
in
is that called?
common. That's going out on my agent sending that out on submission next week. So we
Okay.
will see what happens with
All
that. But
right.
that's also auto fiction. So
Okay, great. Well, I think you're going to do very well. I will be your first reader for both of those.
thank
Yeah,
you.
no, thank you so much. Okay, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you,
And keep us
Kristin.
posted on your books and on social media so I can share them with everybody else as well.
I will. I
All
will.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.